Welcome to Sneak Preview. I'm your host, James McGrath Morris. This program is produced by New Mexico Writers, a not for profit organization committed to supporting and connecting the literary community in the Land of Enchantment. Here, authors, poets, playwrights, and others have agreed to share with us work that has not yet been published. In other words, a sneak preview. With us today is Marguerite Kearns, a journalist and teacher who's writing a memoir and a family history about the activism of her grandparents in the suffrage and peace movements and how their example influenced four generations of her family. Marguerite is the granddaughter of women's rights activist Edna B. Kearns and Wilmer R. Kearns. She grew up in Philadelphia area, learning about her family history, and was a New York State resident for 20 years. She now lives in northern New Mexico. So, Marguerite, what have you brought for us?
Well, it's a sneak preview of a book that's coming out by, it's called An Unfinished Revolution, Edna Buckman Kearns and the Struggle for Women's Rights, SUNY Press, State University of New York. And it's not an academic journal, it's a memoir and family history. It's real people, men and women, who, well, not just their accomplishments, but they're witnesses to history. And of course, you'll see me at age 10. That's where the book starts, and the book ends in Santa Fe, New Mexico, when I'm marching in a women's parade, women's march in 2019, and I'm carrying their photograph. And it's to make the point that women and men have been marching for well over 100 years, and this is from my grandfather's point of view. My grandmother died in 1934, so I only had my grandfather to listen to. And so in this selection, he's telling me about what it was like to be a man, to be marching in a women's parade. And he tells the story, and then there's a selection from my grandmother writing about it. She was a writer and a journalist also. And of course, there's me at age 10, I'm listening to the story. So that's what the book is really about. But it has a lot of basic facts, and from the point of view of people on the ground, real people. And I'm the narrator and descendant, of course. And then in 2019, I'm there carrying their photograph, and they're making history. And so I'm here to record it and share it. Here it is, An Unfinished Revolution. Traitor! Sissy! Hecklers bellowed as the women's demonstration inched forward. Men marchers and women students from Howard University, an African American private university in the nation's capital, they stood out as targets for taunts, assaults, accusations. From the moment my grandfather, Wilmer Kearns, took his place in the men's division on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. in 1913, he sensed the resistance and pushback. The women called it a procession. Others, like my grandfather, called it a march or a demonstration. My grandfather said he hadn't expected the opposition to have such a presence. He said resistance to women voting, it wasn't new. But black activists and men marching in public to reach a national audience in support of civil rights, this was unprecedented. A riot, Granddaddy told me. I felt one on its way. My grandfather said he sensed attack from all sides, from so many pushers and shovers on the sidewalks. They had been in taverns, so you know what that means. Spilling out into the streets, to internal conflicts within the parade organization itself. One reaction was ingrained in him, as it was for many men, to respond to opposition with force. But he promised the parade organizers that if he marched in the men's division, he wouldn't exchange violence with violence. This was basic in Quaker faith and practice, exactly what I'd been taught as a child. But the parade problems piled up, and word spread about white women from southern states threatening to withdraw if a contingent of students from Howard marched down Pennsylvania Avenue. After this threat, Granddaddy Wilmer told me he'd heard word from other marchers, too, about attorney Inez Milholland. Her warning, she refused to ride her horse, Ray Dawn, in front of the procession if the Howard University students didn't participate. The situation became clearer. There would be problems ahead. My grandfather called it the paper trail. This meant assembling a record, an archive, proof of what later could substantiate patterns. When things seemed rough, Quakers became a witness, and Granddaddy showed me what Edna, my grandmother, had preserved in writing in the South Side Observer, published on March 14, 1913. She wrote, down in Washington, I spoke to Miss Alice Paul, chairman of the parade committee. She's a Quaker, a Swarthmore College girl, and suffered imprisonment in Holloway Jail in England 6 weeks, undergoing a hunger strike. Miss Paul said that when Rosalie Jones and her hikers reached Washington, she realized that the parade would need more protection than they first supposed. So she went to President Taft, who referred her to Secretary of War Stimson. But Mr. Stimson, he was an openly acknowledged anti-suffragist. They really were into their issues. I'm telling you, but she didn't say that. That's my comment. But my grandmother said she understood that troops from Fort Myer near Washington were called out. But I saw 6 men on horseback mowing the crowds down, and after they passed by, instead of the policemen keeping the crowd back, they allowed them to fall right back in again. I must confess that I thought troops meant soldiers, but I have a lot to learn, she wrote. Now, if my grandmother Edna admitted she had a lot to learn, I was right there with her at age 10 in what I needed to understand. Granddaddy said that Quakers played an essential role in standing up for peace when strident patriotism pressured usually calm people to become aggressive and occasionally strident. My grandfather told me, concerned people must stand firm and make sure peaceful tactics are kept alive.
Bravo, that was wonderful. Took us right back to that time.
Yes.
Has it been life-changing for you to put this together?
Well, it's something I started when I was at age 10, just asking questions. And of course, back then we didn't learn women's history in school. This was something that was very distinct in my family, and it was faith-based. So it wasn't just something that you would just do and maybe later get burnt out about. It was just part of life, and so I heard all this, the gossip, and I heard the stories, and I heard the scandals and the secrets, and they're all in the book because that's that every family faces a much more complicated life than just what their activism might have been. So it's in the context of the times, and it's the context of being a family. And there's over 100 photographs, original photographs. So you get to see what they look like. My grandfather, my grandmother, they're all relatives of mine, but they're real characters in history. And it's a point of view that it's not just about how wonderful they were. It's also all the leaky edges of life and how they affected all of us up till today. And so this is a huge accomplishment for me. It started as a gift for my family, but now it's a gift to the world. It's a perspective of a time that adds to all of the different stories that have come out over the years. And it's an enormous accomplishment. I'm so tickled to be here.
Well, it sounds splendid. Thank you, Marguerite. Tune in again for another installment of Sneak Preview, or even better, subscribe to our YouTube channel. To learn more about New Mexico Writers Organization, visit our website, which is found at nmwriters.org.